just about at 4 o'clock. Becky, do you mind sticking with me through the introduction?
Sure.
Just in case. All right.
Sure. It was nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
All right. Well, hello to everyone who is watching on Zoom and following us on Facebook. This is a very special webinar for us today. And before we get started and do introductions, let me just go through some of our typical orientation slides. The Crow Canyon Archaeological Center acknowledges the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Dene, and Jicarilla Apache people on whose traditional homelands our institution sits. Our mission is entirely about Indigenous people in the past, present, and future. It would not be possible. We respectfully recognize and honor ancestral and descendant Indigenous communities for their contributions to us and to all humankind. We are grateful to all Indigenous people and support the preservation and protection of cultural traditions, ancestral connections, and sacred lands. We have been working together in our staff retreats recently and gathering to talk more about how to make our land acknowledgement more specific and actionable. So stay tuned for some of the work that we've been doing at Crow Canyon. Also, thanks to Rebecca Hammond, who has now gone behind her Mountain Ute tribal side. It was primary our manager of American Indian Initiatives and longtime educator. Becky and her interns have been working on expanding access to Indigenous resources online. Please do check it out at crowcanyon.org, online Indigenous resources. They have been putting some wonderful things, wonderful access to resources that may be of interest regarding Native organizations, podcasts, artists, authors, homepages of tribal entities and websites. So please take a look and give us your feedback. And a big thank you to everyone who is joining us today and who's joined us on webinars. These are entirely free to the public and entirely supported by your donations. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So many people are incredibly generous about donating every time they register and at other times. So thank you. We could not do this without you. Everybody's familiar with Zoom. Just the one thing I do remind folks is if you could put your questions in the Q&A section. Sometimes people get busy in the chat saying hello to their friends and the questions get buried. And you can put those questions in at any time. They will not get lost. You don't have to wait until the end of the presentation and we will sort through them and sometimes combine questions that are about the same topic. If you're having any issues with Zoom, go ahead and jump on board at our Facebook live stream or watch this after the fact on our YouTube channel. There will be no webinar next week. We have our board meeting, which has us all kind of running around. But the week after that, we have another fantastic webinar, What is Indigenous Traditional Ecological Knowledge and Why Does It Matter? With James Rattling-Leaf Sr. So excited about that webinar as well. But without further ado, we are incredibly excited about our presenter today, Dr. Paulette Steeves, who is Cree Métis, is an Indigenous archaeologist. She was born in Whitehorse in the Yukon Territories and grew up in Lillooet, Canada, British Columbia. She's a first-generation college graduate and received her bachelor's in anthropology with honors from the University of Arkansas. In 2000. In 2008, Dr. Steeves was awarded the Clifford D. Clark Fellowship for attending graduate studies at Binghamton University in New York State, where she successfully defended her dissertation in 2015. Dr. Steeves was taught anthropology and archaeology courses in Canada and the US, focusing on Native American and First Nations histories and the decolonization of academia and knowledge production. She is currently an associate professor in sociology anthropology and the chair of the Geography, Geology, and Land Management program at Algoma University and is a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous History, Healing, and Reconciliation. We have been since it came out in 2021, very excited about Dr. Steeves' book, The Indigenous Paleolithic of the Western Hemisphere, which has received awards. Dr. Steeves is, as we were talking about, in high demand as a speaker, and we are so honored to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Tansi, let me share my screen and get my PowerPoint up. And if at any time the PowerPoint is not working, please just let me know. Just interrupt me and let me know. There, do you see just my PowerPoint now?
Yep, you're coming through clear.
Okay, awesome. Tansi, thank you everyone for coming today. So research is ceremony. Research is framed in Indigenous method and theory based on respect, relationality, and reciprocity. It is a praxis that weaves through institutional and public spaces to create social change. My place in being a part of this ceremony of research and in telling this story was told to me within a discussion I had with a Salish elder, Leonard Sampson, in Lillooet in 1988. At the time, I was going through a very difficult time. I was becoming a single parent with 3 children. I had about 26 cents a truck and a grade 8 education. And I went to talk to Elder Sampson about my path. And he said the elders had talked about me often when I was growing up, and they felt that what I was going through at the time was training to learn to deal with difficult situations, because he said in the future, I had a job to do that would be something that would be way harder than what I was going through at the time, but it was something that would really, really help Indian people, not just our communities, but all Indian people everywhere. And when I was graduating with my PhD in 2015, I understood the meaning of his talk that day, 25 years earlier. What it meant is I just had to rewrite world history to include the Americas. And I said, you know what, I got this. So in sharing details of who I am, I claim my ancestry, I acknowledge my ancestors, and I declare my position as a researcher and an author. I intentionally locate myself as an Indigenous person first and a researcher second. This presents the ways of being, knowing and doing that my research is based in. So archaeologists, Western archaeologists, have created many stories regarding the Indigenous past of the Western Hemisphere. However, they very rarely, if ever, consulted with Indigenous people about their oral traditions, their histories, and their ties to the land. Archaeologists created a false cultural group from their conjecture from a stone tool. They called them the Clovis people and said they were the first people in the Americas. But the Clovis were not first. They were not even a cultural group or a people. A cultural group is based on people's language, their life ways, their songs, their foods, their traditions. It's not just based on a stone tool. So Clovis were not first, they were not a people. They were a Western creation, a fictional cultural group. The only place the Clovis people ever existed was in the wildest imagination of the archaeological mind. What I have found through my research is that there are hundreds of stories held in the land, archaeological sites, that are older than 11,200 years, older than so-called Clovis technologies in both North and South America. And there is evidence of mammalian migrations between the Western and Eastern hemispheres across millions of years. The existence of hundreds of ancestral sites dating to the Pleistocene creates a dialogue from which Indigenous people can challenge erasures of their histories and their links to the land. It foregrounds their Indigenous identities and empowers them in seeking justice. I have also found that events and histories are held in oral traditions. This knowledge carries discussions of extinct species and tells us about Indigenous peoples' deep history from the Middle Pleistocene to the present day. So these maps show just a small collection of sites in my database. When my book came out, I had around 300 sites in my book. It's now around 700 sites that predate Clovis. So all of these sites are based on published academic papers. So they have everything that archaeology demands to be a legitimate archaeological site. And the one place that archaeologists has ignored is the gray literature. So there are a lot of reports on sites that have recorded stratigraphy and dates and artifacts and very good analysis, but they're tucked away in archaeological offices in every state, United States, and every province in Canada. They're not necessarily all published. And I recently found out that just in Arizona alone, there are 1,400 sites in the state office that predate Clovis. So in the Americas, the deep indigenous past prior to 11,200 years before present has been aggressively denied by Eurocentric archaeologists for decades. Archaeological denial of the deep indigenous past of the Western Hemisphere has cleaved indigenous peoples' links to their homeland and created them as recent immigrants from Asia and Europe. But think about this, decolonize your minds. Ask yourself, did Asia exist 12,000 years ago? No. Asia and Europe did not exist during the Pleistocene. What existed were early humans residing on the continents of the Eastern and Western hemispheres. There were no distinctive cultural groups known as Europeans or Asians during the Pleistocene. So why do archaeologists insist on saying that we are Asians from Asia? It disconnects us from our identity and from our homelands. It makes us immigrants from somewhere else, and it is scientifically incorrect. Geopolitical terminologies are incorrectly used to make claims that Asians and Europeans settled the Americas. Such normalized and embedded discussions are violent, and they continue to erase indigenous peoples' histories and links to the land. To further support the erasure of indigenous people, archaeologists normalized the mysterious disappearance of many indigenous communities, including the Clovis people. This assures archaeologists that contemporary indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere are not related to the earliest people to have lived in the Western Hemisphere, and thus have no claims to antiquity, lands, artifacts, human remains, or deep history. Thus, archaeologists are the ones who retain power, control, and ownership over the past, archaeological sites, human remains, and artifacts. However, the first people and their descendants are indigenous to the continents of the Western Hemisphere and have been so for thousands of years. The Western Hemisphere is where their cultural identities and lifeways were born. This is where they are from. Indigenous stories are literal and metaphorical and meant to be woven through minds and hearts across time as listeners grow into an understanding of all of their relations and their place among them. This is a picture of rock art that was just found in the last few years in the Amazon. This is an amazing and gigantic library of knowledge on the land. Many of these images are stories about people's history, extinct species, and entire communities, and all of their cultural events. So this is North America around 11 to 12,000 years ago, supposedly when the so-called Clovis people crossed from the area we know today as Asia in the Eastern Hemisphere to the area we know today as North America in the Western Hemisphere. This was not a time for mammals or humans to be migrating intercontinentally, because not only were there a lot of huge glaciers in the way, there was no food and no fresh water on the land. However, this is North America 2 million years ago. The entire continent almost was somewhat of a subtropical forest. There was a lot of food, there was a lot of fresh water, and there was a connection between the Eastern and Western hemispheres. There were many times across the last 2 million years when between glaciations, this is what the Eastern and Western hemisphere looked like. A very vibrant, very good place for human and mammals to be traveling. So what did the Eastern Hemisphere look like 2 million years ago? As you can see on this map, early humans had walked 14,000 kilometers from their homelands in Africa to create new homelands in the area we know today as Asia. So we know that over 2 million years ago, early hominins were habitating in the area we know as Northern Asia. This is not very far from what we call today the Bering landmass that connected the Eastern and Western hemispheres. At its closest, it's a 57-mile journey. From one of the oldest sites in Asia, it's 4,000 miles. So not that far, because we can tell from early human history on a global scale that early humans and hominids were very, very capable of traveling long distances and traveling intercontinentally. So does anything in this picture to anybody look at all Canadian? Let me give you a hint. The geese in the sky are Canadian geese. That's because this is a drawing based on fossil camelid remains found on Ellesmere Island that date to 3.5 million years ago. And we know that camelids evolved in North America. This is where they were first. We know that they expanded their territory to include huge parts of what we know today as of Asia. Camels went all over the place. So for them to do that, they had to have a viable migration route with food, grazing fields, and fresh water. So we know that sometime over millions of years, camelids were going back and forth across a landmass between what we know as the Eastern and the Western hemispheres. Another of our four-legged relations that made that journey was the horse. So this is a picture of the dawn horse. Horses arose first in the Western hemisphere and migrated to the Eastern hemisphere and vice versa. It wasn't just a one-way trip. Across millions of years, they came back and forth many, many times. We know if our four-legged relations could do this, so then too could our two-legged. Another very well-known Pleistocene species that made that journey is the saber-toothed cat. So we have evidence of viable migration routes between the Eastern and Western hemisphere across millions of years based on a lot of solid data from paleontologists. So the oldest known species of saber-toothed cat dates just over 5 million years ago and is from Florida. So we know that saber-tooth expanded on pretty much global scale. They probably were following and eating the horses and camelids, and they were going both ways also, back and forth. So there are a number of species, and this is where we really need to, as scientists, we need to expand our view. So our understanding of early human migrations should not just be based on artifacts or dates or someone's opinion of a few sites or which site might be oldest. Our understanding should be holistic. We should understand the history of the early environment over the last 4 million years. If we have early humans, and we know we did, early hominids in Northern Asia at 2 million years ago, we need to understand how early hominids and early humans moved around the world. And we need to stop putting things in a vacuum and talking just about North America, which did not exist millions of years ago, but the Western and Eastern Hemisphere, and to really expand our understandings of humans, human migrations, and human movements, and their interactions with their four-legged relations on a global scale. So this is the Cactus Hill site in West Virginia. This was excavated by a husband and wife cultural resource management team, the McAvoys. They said they had invested more time and money defending their dates and conducting new tests than they had ever imagined. And although they think the antiquity of the site has been established, the effort has been very stressful. And if they were to do it all over again, maybe they wouldn't dig so deep. So here's the thing with archaeology of North America. This area was called an area of academic suicide. Some faculty were fired when they published on sites that were older than Clovis. The McAvoys faced violent critique when they published that this site was older than Clovis dates. And a lot of archaeologists have told me that they know archaeologists and they themselves were fearful of publishing on older than Clovis sites because it would ruin their career. That's not science, that's racism and bias. This is Alan or Albert Goodyear, and he's been excavating at the Topper site in South Carolina, right close to Georgia, for a number of years. And he said he suddenly felt like he was going against the orthodoxy of North American archaeology. He said it was a weird feeling to be putting a career of 30 years on the table, but there's no turning back because he wanted to tell the truth. So he reached a Clovis level at the Topper site, and he wanted to dig a little deeper to record the soils and possibly get an idea about the environment. But what happened was he hit another layer of stone tools deeper than Clovis. Those stone tools dated to 50,000 years before present. A graduate student, Douglas Sane from Texas, did a monster dissertation, I believe it was over 900 pages, use-wear on the tools from the Topper site. And he stated that he had shown that they were definitely human-made tools and had been used perhaps to cut grasses. So this is a very solid site with a lot of data and a lot of evidence. This is me. I'm posing nicely for people from the Denver Museum, looking all professional, and I realized at the end of the day, I had my t-shirt on inside out all day. But this is the Lacina site. So the berm you see here in front of the backfilled site, that was funded, I believe, by the federal government because this reservoir rose up and cut back that bank. That's how they first found this site. And they built that berm to protect it. So this site had excavations and many field schools carried out here over 11 years. A lot of archaeologists worked on this site, and Dr. Holland from the Denver Museum of Nature and Science was in charge of this site for a long time. This is in southwest Nebraska along the Medicine Creek Reservoir. And what I'm doing here, this is post-excavation when the site had been backfilled. but not the entire site had been excavated. So what they do is they go out every year and collect any materials or artifacts that are eroding from the cliff face on the parts of the site that are not excavated. So what I'm doing there is I'm standing on the very end of the berm and I'm collecting mastodon bone that is eroding out of the cliff face. This site dated to 22,000 years before present and had a lot of spirally fractured mammoth bone. So it's a site where early humans were butchering, a mastodon or a mammoth. And Dr. Holland is very meticulous in his work. And any archaeologists that are publishing on a pre-Clovis site will go above and beyond to do way more dates and way more testing than required for most sites, because they know they're going to face violent pushback and critique from some of their peers. So number one here is the Lucena site. When I was doing my field work, I would do a lot of research to see if there were any other sites in the area. So what we like to see is a regional area with a number of sites that have the same technology, maybe dates that fall in the same range. So this isn't all of the Pleistocene sites, but you can see there are a number of sites around the Lucena site that all have spirally fractured mammoth bone, and some have stone tools. One dates at 14,000, the majority date from 16 to 20,000 years before present. So what we see here is a strong set of data and evidence for a regional area. Now, at the time, that's like 22,000 calibrated years before present, Lucena was about 500 miles south of the very edge of the glacier during that time. This is a berm in Southern California. So the highway department wanted to build a short connecting highway between the coast highway, is it 1 or 5, and the inland highway 15. And although this was just a short distance, there were 114 sites found when they began to clear this area for the connector highway. The Soretti Mastodon site is one of those sites. So there are a lot of really great scientists in Southern California that study the soils, because this is an area that's very different. It's had a lot of eruptions, a lot of earthquakes, and you really have to be specialized in that one area to be able to understand it. And a lot of scientists were called out to this site, because what they found was mastodon bone. So the mastodon bone was not disarticulated. It wasn't like the mastodon laid down and died, but the two femur heads were set aside, I think, close to each other. It looked like humans had stacked some of these mastodon bones. And what you see in the top left-hand corner is a mastodon bone, and there's a really nice curvature on the top of that bone, and that's an impact point. So that's where someone would have used one of these boulders that were found at the site to break that bone. Now, mastodon and mammoth bone, even a short-faced bear couldn't bite into a femur or a large bone and break it. The only way to break these bones, and there's been a lot of experimental archaeology done on elephant bones, is to take a boulder and bash them. So for early humans, the bones were very rich in marrow. They were a very good food source, and the bone itself made some really beautiful, strong, solid tools. These boulders did not belong at the site. They were out of place. So we know that someone would have had to have brought them to the site. The archaeologists that worked on this site from day one knew that this would be a very, very old site, and they knew it would face extreme criticism. So they were very, very, very careful in everything they did. They had these artifacts curated safely at the Museum of Man in San Diego, I think for over 12 years, waiting for dating technologies to get to a place where they could not possibly be questioned on older bone. And when they finally did get these bones dated, they dated to minimally 130,000 years before present. Dr. Soretti and Dr. Holand and their co-authors wrote a very, very strong article. So you can imagine in North American archaeology, where it has been denied for 100 years that people were ever here before 11 to 12,000 years ago, how easy is it to get a site that's 130,000 years old published? No one thought it would ever happen, but they wrote such a strong, compelling article and presented such strong data and evidence. This was published, I believe, in Science or Nature. So very good work on their part. So number one is where the Soretti site is located in Southern California. And actually, there's around, I think, 20 sites in this area. They're not all dated, but a lot of them have stone tools that can be dated between 40 to 200,000 years before present. Number three is the Calico site. So this site has been dated from 40,000 to 200,000 years before present. Louis Leakey, the famous African paleontologist, worked on the Calico site. And when he published on this site, he was called a crazy old man. He was insulted in many ways. This is a world-renowned paleontologist. The man knows his soils. He knows stone tools. He knows what he's talking about. But that didn't matter to American archaeologists who were defending the Clovis first model. They had no issues with violently critiquing his work. Number four is China Lake, and number five is Mannix Lake. Both of these were Pleistocene age lakes with lots of sites with stone tools that would date to over 40,000 years typologically around them. South of San Diego in central Mexico, there are 5 sites around a reservoir that have had a lot of work done on them. They were dated, some of them by the U.S. Geological Survey, and they date from 40,000 to 200,000 years before present. So what we see here in this very southwest of the United States and in central Mexico, we see a regional area, and this is the only place in the Americas I've seen this, where sites are dating from 40 to 200,000 years. There are numerous sites. So I began my my research journey by asking questions regarding the paleo-environmental possibilities of Pleistocene migrations. So what did the world look like when early humans were traveling between the area we know today as Africa and Europe and Asia? What were the times that it was possible for them to connect intercontinentally? What was the earliest time that we see of people using some form of open water transport? We know now that people were traveling to the area we know today as Crete over 100,000 years ago. You always needed some form of open water transport. So we've never really given early humans their due. They were very, very intelligent and very, very capable of traveling great distances, even across water. And so when you're thinking about, you know, the timing of migrations between continents and or the earliest possible time of migrations to the Western Hemisphere, it's pretty much the same as anywhere else in the world. And so we don't cut it off and put it in a bottle or a vacuum. We include it with the rest of the world. From what I have learned, I argue there is a vast body of evidence that supports initial migrations to the Western Hemisphere much, much earlier than the accepted dates for Clovis. So this is Vine Deloria Jr., and he argued that Unless and until Indians are in some way connected with world history as early peoples, we will never be accorded full humanity. So remember that for decades, some archaeologists have argued that we're the most recent migration in the world. So we're not as evolved as other areas of the world. And our evolution and our intelligence comes from Asian cultures in Asia. That's all very, very racist and very, very incorrect. But the impact of archaeological knowledge production on Indigenous people has been discussed by a few archaeologists who recognize that the archaeological record used to interpret and construct the past has power in the present. This is Linda Tuwali Smith, and she said that it was no surprise then that one of the first aspects of Indigenous being that suffered from intentional eradication by colonizing forces, that includes archaeologists, were histories which testified to a deep, ancient, and civilized past. The same thing happened in Australia that for a long time has happened in the Americas, in that early peoples and early sites were always denied. So there are costs for the uncritical acceptance of knowledge produced via biases used to filter these data, such as the Clovis first hypothesis of initial migrations. In the case of the uncritical acceptance of late dates of initial migrations to the Western Hemisphere, it's not just the archaeologists who supported arguments for earlier sites who suffered from academic bashing and an overly critical gaze of their research. The greatest price has been paid by the Indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere who have long endured soul wounds and social and political disparities created in part through cleaved links to ancestral places and times. When we provide the evidence, the stories, when we rewrite history and we re-educate students, they change how they see Indigenous peoples. Their worldviews are changed. I've done the research, so I'm not just saying that. And when we do that, we push back on racism, misinformation, and discrimination. We create paths to a much more better and peaceful future for all people. We have a responsibility to the next 7 generations, both Indigenous and settler, to critique and rewrite Western data, to weave Indigenous knowledge through education, and to continue the work of healing and repatriation. As a graduate student in 2012, Creator gifted me with a new word, pyroepistemology. It is a metaphorical terminology that describes the work of critical Indigenous scholarship and the decolonizing work carried out by like-minded and informed peers and their allies. A practice of pyroepistemology is a ceremony that cleanses the academic landscape of discussions that misinform worldviews and fuel racism. Such literary renewal clears the way for a healthy growth in academic fields of thought and centers of knowledge production. Much like our ancestors, and in current day, Indigenous people use fire to clean the land, to allow the land space to regenerate. We use our heart fire to clean academia of those dehumanizing and incorrect discussions of Indigenous people, and to create space for new growth and healing and reconciliation. Rewriting Western data and Indigenous history is a praxis that weaves Indigenous knowledge through literature and stories, pushes back on misinformation, making the world a better place, weaving paths to a peaceful future. I have heard back from many Indigenous people, Indigenous entire classes that have read my book, Indigenous settlers that were brought to tears because they knew for years that Clovis first was not right. They knew the way that we discussed and our history discussed was erasing our history, was dehumanizing. They didn't know why, and they didn't know how to fix it. And for Indigenous students, I'll share briefly, quickly, a story. My daughter went to a healing circle. She lives in BC on her dad's res. And she went to a healing circle in the north, and there was a large group of young women. Now, a lot of our communities suffer from social and political disparities and high rates of suicide. Every young girl in the circle was to say one thing, to share one thought that brought hope to them. And she said this young girl's face just lit right up, and she was so excited, and her face was glowing. And she said, the girl said, there's this archaeologist in the States, and she's Cree, and she says, we've been here over 50,000 years, and that gives me hope. We'll get our identity, our culture, our land, our life ways. We'll get everything back. And my daughter said, tee hee hee. I did not tell her it was my mom. So I've heard back from many students, and it has brought me to tears many times. They are so grateful that someone has spoken out. One thing I'm doing right now is I'm writing a second book. Well, I'm writing two second books, the second book of the Indigenous Paleolithic, but I'm writing a book to honor those archaeologists, those early archaeologists that published on pre-Clovis sites, those archaeologists that got fired, those archaeologists that got name called, that got called bad archaeologists, that were attacked left and right when they published on an older site. So that book will have 60 chapters, one for each of 60 archaeologists that whose work, I couldn't have done my work without their work. If they had not been strong enough to publish on Pre-Clovis sites in a field that's called an area of academic suicide, I would have had nothing to go on. So I'm very grateful for them. So let me close my PowerPoint. Did I close it?
Yep, that was perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to give Liz just a moment to hop back on, and we'll get moving into the Q&A, but that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Steeves.
Thank you so much. Wow. We knew it was coming, but also just a spectacular presentation as well. I have a few kind of questions, but Becky, I see you. You have unveiled yourself, and I wanted to give you the opportunity if you had any questions or comments first. Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
No, it was great. Thank you. I mean, it's, you know, there's a lot of different views, and I think oftentimes that like some of the words that you use that people are not used to hearing are some people are offended, you know, and I think that, you know, if they ever thought about it the other way, as we as Indigenous people are offended all the time, and they never think about that. And that's the other part of, you know, wanting to be understanding, you know, that where they have to think about it and thinking about it outside the box. And so that's, you know, that's really important to for other people to realize that, you know, it's from a different view, and the words that we're using are words that we've learned from other people as well. But it's just that thing where people are easily offended, and they shouldn't be. That's what I like to say.
Yeah, disruption is good, and a lot of Indigenous scholars have written about that. Nothing changes when you're comfortable. And so you need to disrupt your thought to actually decolonize your mind. But you're right too. If they thought about how we're offended by being called Asians from Asia, they wouldn't say that.
Yeah, I just wanted to point that out because I thought that was important.
No, it's hugely important. And maybe to follow up a bit on Becky's comment and something Becky said while we were chatting in the beginning about the changes that we are making as archaeologists, researchers, educators here, that's very much in alignment with what you're talking about. We have an assumption at Crow Canyon that if we correct misinformation about Indigenous history through education, right? Teaching both Indigenous students and non-Native students who also need to understand what the misinformation that they have learned about Indigenous history as written by Western archaeologists who have their own implicit or explicit agenda, right? We assume that when we do that teaching, that it does change worldviews, that it makes people, it reveals the bias, right? That that non-Native people may not understand is implicit in saying Indigenous people don't have these histories, weren't capable of the material culture that we're seeing. That's our assumption. And I was wondering, as we try to do that, to shift our programs and our curriculum and our research to reflect that bias correction, do you have any ideas for us on how to make that most effective, how to maximize it, how to measure it?
Yeah, I think it's like with any teaching, you show examples. So you show examples of what bias is. You show examples of what a holistic view of that same topic or subject is that includes Indigenous knowledge. So I think I think we're really blessed. When I was in undergrad and grad school, even in 2015, there weren't very many books or articles by Indigenous authors available. Now there are thousands. And so there's a lot of great material to bring in, but you can't just bring in the new material. You can't decolonize people's minds, because a lot of people do not understand from the get-go what colonization is. And so you have to discuss examples of colonization, how it impacts people, both settler and Indigenous, and how decolonizing your mind enriches your mind and your understanding. So that's what education is. So we're at a point where including many diverse voices and expanding our knowledge. And like I say, for the whole question on the Americas, everybody's focused on, the Americas. You know what? The Americas didn't exist in the Pleistocene. The world did. And we had people coming and going everywhere. And when people realize that, it just opens up their mind to possibilities. And if you look at early human history, our understanding of early human migrations has completely changed in the last 5 to 10 years, because we have gotten new information. We've gotten new species, Homo neanderthals, Denisovians, right? The Hobbit. So all of this expands our understanding and our knowledge. And we're supposed to think that happens in the rest of the Eastern Hemisphere, but nothing changes in the Western Hemisphere. No, you got to remove those peels, those layers of that onion, and see the world and early humans as what they were. And so for Western archaeologists, they've always closed that door. They built that iron gate and nobody was coming and going. People were coming and going all over the world, on the East Coast and the West Coast. And so, you open up your mind, and the possibilities for decolonizing your mind and really getting a deeper understanding and appreciation for early humans is amazing.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I've been sort of taking notes on the sly as we work on these concepts too. We have a really interesting question from someone who is familiar with, it looks like, your work and the concepts. So I'm just going to read this. It's a good question in and of itself, and I'm interested in it as well. they say, I love the concept of pyroepistemology. As a settler anthropologist, I strive to utilize Indigenous scholarship in courses and include a critical lens on dominant narratives within the field when teaching. In terms of reworking of knowledge production itself, can you share your thoughts on appropriate actions settler scholars could take to fuel pyroepistemology within academic knowledge production?
Well, I think read this. This sounds odd, okay? This sounds odd, but let me tell you what happens. Read whatever literature you're assigning. And so as a graduate student, I had to help a professor teach a course, and I won't say any names. But in that book, there was a description of what is an artifact. And it said an artifact can be a beautiful 20,000-year-old spear point from France, or it can be an indistinguishable flake some weary Indian chucked out in a Mississippi cornfield 1,000 years ago. And I'm like, my jaw dropped. And when I brought that to the professor, I'm like, why do you use this book? He was so angry. I'm pretty sure now he did change and he's changed his book, but I think he wasn't aware of that statement being in there. And why would an archaeologist call an artifact from France beautiful and 20,000 years old and one from North America indistinguishable? It was just chucked out. And how did they know the Indian was weary 1,000 years ago? Like, why make that up? Well, because you want to dehumanize us and our histories. So I think it's really important as faculty that we stay up to date also. So up to date, not just on the Americas, but what's happened with early human migration, our understanding on a global scale, right? And I think for a lot of students also, it's starting to change, but they haven't been taught about colonization. They're only just learning about, you know, the horrible history of residential schools. And so there's a lot that we need to catch them up on, but the first steps are always, you know, examples of colonization and how it has impacted people, because this has been intentionally blocked from education in many areas. I think it's getting better. I think there's a new generation of archaeologists coming in the field, and a lot of ones that are there are taking the time to work and to read and to keep learning. And that's what I think is important, just staying up to date, reading, learning, and email me and ask me if you have a question anytime.
That's fantastic. Maybe kind of to spin off of the getting that the next generation is more broad-minded, that it's getting better. I've been wanting to ask, for us, we want to have the greatest impact that we can with our research and teaching. Whose worldview do you think it is most important to change? Like, does it matter if you can't ever change the perspectives of the older establishment Anglo archaeologists who are violently object, right, to any challenge to the old Clovis model?
Well, it's interesting to see how quick that field is shrinking. So I just did a mega survey. Like, I sent out 2,000 invitations to a survey on the early peopling of the Americas, 10 simple questions. We did a survey in 2012, and very few people thought, you know, anyone had been here before 11 or 12,000. So my survey, which I have to write up into an article yet, but over 65% of the people that responded believed that early humans were here before 24,000 years before present, and likely much earlier. They believe that oral traditions and rock art hold knowledge, and that we should be looking into and listening to and studying and including that knowledge when we write people's history. That is a huge change from just a few years ago. So I think that, you know, there's been a number of news sites published. I started publishing in 2015, and I slowly saw others creeping out from under the rocks where they, you know, in the caves where they'd been barred by the status quo, and publishing. And I see archaeologists now that have retired, and they don't give a damn now because they can't be fired, and they're publishing. And so all of a sudden there's this amazing field of new archaeologists, older archaeologists that refuse to be silenced anymore, and they're all gathering their courage and they're all publishing and talking, and I'm like, yay, you know, keep that fire going. So when you think of healing as a fire, we call the 8th fire, which will be one of healing for all mankind, right? This is one little flame in that fire, but everybody can fan that fire. Everybody can add to those flames. And that's what we need to do. Those fires of healing and reconciliation, we need to keep fanning them and getting them bigger and bigger and bigger. And then we bring peace to our spaces, right? Hopefully soon.
Yes, yes, and I am actually. I think Becky might be too. That we are hopeful, right? It does seem like you said, perspectives are shifting. There are things that people are assuming and taking for granted that we would have had to, you know, really educate and debate about before. Making that assumption that the next generation is takes this for granted and moves forward. What do you think the next steps will be for the kind of research that graduate students or anyone would do, starting from this foundation instead of the older foundations? Someone asked in the questions, with this, you know, moving forward in this way, is there research regarding what do we do with it now? Are there going to be new styles or categories or classifications, which of course is a Western archaeological model to say, oh gosh, we have new stuff to put in boxes, right? But what do you think where do you think this is going to go scholarship wise?
There's so much work to do. And so another nice thing since my book came out is that archaeologists have reached out to me. Those that always supported, like Clovis first, was never right. You know, both in North and South America, they're talking about, look at these tools. They're just like Aleutian tools. I've got them in at least 16 sites, you know, in the United States. I'm retired now. Let them critique me. I don't care. I'm publishing on it. Yay. And so there has been a lot of evidence of older stone tools in the Americas that has been, like everything, quashed. And so there's a huge amount of work to do to discuss timeframes, to name timeframes. You can't go by any one community because this is kind of like, this is half of the world, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of work to do, but also funding, support. Anybody in a position like you're in can support a fellow archaeologist with a letter of recommendation for a grant, telling them about funding, supporting them in all these ways. One of the hardest things when I'm doing grants and applications for funding is, oh my God, who do I ask for a letter now? You know, I need to make a bigger list. You know, who's going to support this? And so, you know, funding is really super important, but I'm just overjoyed. Like today I hired my first Bachelor's of Archaeology student who reached out to me. Please, can I work with you? I really want to do this. Oh my God. Yay, we need the next generation. I need someone to do this. I've always said, I know I'm going to live to be 126 because I have a lot of work to get done. And so I just have to keep working. I'll never retire. Okay. But just to have that first archaeologist that I get to have work with me and train and hopefully send them off to grad school to pick up what I'm doing and pass it on. Oh my God, I see the tree growing. I'm so excited.
Well, spectacular. And we are too. And thank you for that advice, because we are in positions to recommend, to fund research, to help normalize this direction in the field that is so long overdue. Becky, did you have, we're just about right at the hour, and I want to be respectful of Dr. Steeves' time. Did you have any final thoughts before we close up? Oh, sorry, muted. You're muted. Sorry.
I know, sorry. No, thank you so much. And I hope that you inspire more Native people to jump out of the box, to continue to do great research and, get finally our side and saying, yeah, we've been here for thousands of years. And so, it's this groundbreaking thing. And so thank you so much for taking that lead in doing that.
Well, thank you for having me, Miigwech.
Thank you. We will be in touch and hope to see more of you.
Okay,
All
bye.
right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.